Hello and welcome to Last Boomer Standings Productions. We're going to be talking about my recent trip and my first trip to Newfoundland in September 2023, where my daughter was married. Now let's go through a quick summary of what I'm going to be talking about. First of all, the term rock, what it really means. Number two, the transition to outports. This is fishing ports. Why? The story behind discovering Newfoundland when I was very young. There's a special book called Billy Topsail. In Newfoundland, they call it Billy Topsail, and that's the name of the hero. Number five is the book Lore, Newfoundland Culture or Not. I'm talking about my buddy Ted in St. John's and his discoveries, based on my curiosity. Finally, as I mentioned, this is a first visit to Newfoundland. Where were all the poor people? And finally, why so many towns that I traveled through look like I was in Fort McMurray. Okay, we'll move on. The Rock. Really does sound like a wrestler. The name, we're not sure whether it's the origins was from Newfoundland or from what the expression that we use for people that weren't born in Newfoundland. They call them they call them mainlanders. Okay, now seems to make sense from my visit to Newfoundland because. Everywhere we go, the one kind of garden that is very easy to make in Newfoundland is called a rock garden. So if you got so much rocks, then and you basically have mountains, you have coves, and like my brother-in-law said, driving through some of the outer areas of Newfoundland reminded him of driving through Norway. Okay, so is it the rock? Is that if a rock best describes Newfoundland, then I assume that describes the coast, and if you call it a rock, then basically what happens is it seems like the coast is the one just giant rock, which is there to stop the North Atlantic or the Gulf of St. Lawrence or at the other end the Straits of Bellied. Now, is that the case? No, it's not. So if you take your hand and you put it on a table and you stretch it open, then you look at the gap between the fingers. We can call them coves, we can call them bays, we can call them mouths of rivers. This is an example of what the coast is. So just take 1,000 hands, 2,000 hands, lay them side by side, then you got an idea of what Newfoundland is. It's just a bunch of fingers and whatever leading out into the sea. Okay. Then, if that's the case, then where were the first settlers that came to Newfoundland? If that was 300 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, well, they settled in where all these little coasts. Okay, and the reason you would do that is you don't have full exposure to the sea. You have fairly calm water, and in the case of bays and coves, then you could have fish populations. So you would set up, or they would set up little fishing villages, outports, virtually anywhere in Newfoundland. And so these people became very self-reliant. By the way, that is a strong characteristics of people from Newfoundland, is they're self-reliant. And then basically they just say thank you to the folks from the outports. And so they would be able to have families together, and then they have to find a way to get to the fish. I mean, you assume assumptions you can't fish from the land. So first of all, you want adequate forests, all throughout Newfoundland. And so people just built boats, and you didn't have to build a big boat, a long liner or a large sailing vessel. What you did was you built the equivalent of a rowboat, a skiff, a punt is one expression that I hear around, and then all you got to do is add a mast and a sail, and you go in, and you could basically feed your family. And that's what you could do before the ice, and then of course in the wintertime you could go hunting for fresh game or whatever. So you could have hundreds and hundreds of outports in Newfoundland, basically close, and some close to the capital in St. John's, and some very, very far. And how the only way you could get to them was by boat. So the boats had to, whatever the boats were, had to go out into the North Atlantic or the Gulf to be able to, to go shopping and this. And that brings up a character that I mentioned, whose name was Billy Topsail. I'm sorry, we'll get his real name was in Newfoundland is Billy Topsail. Okay, because the only reason I remembered Billy Topsail was, and a story that I heard when I was in elementary school, which I will explain, was when I saw a sign for a town called Topsail, and then suddenly, bang, everything came together. Well, it turned out I was raised in a suburb of Montreal called Verdun, and one of the it wasn't a book; it was a short story. That was given to us in class in our Catholic school, was a book called Billy Topsail and Skipper. And so I would remember portions of Billy Topsail, his dog, Skipper, his punt, which was called a salmon bellied punt, which means it wasn't very seaworthy. And some of the adventures that he had, and he was from one of the outports. Again, it's a fictional name, and what he did was he was the age of 12, which is close to the age that I was, and transitioning into an adult and trying to do all the things that the adults were doing. And he was doing. He was going fishing out into his bay, and that was the story. And as time went on, as I was traveling in Newfoundland, the name Topsail came up, and I would ask people, "Did you ever hear of Billy Topsail? Did you ever hear of from this?" And I got everywhere I got, nobody heard about it. Nobody heard about it. And I was getting really frustrated. It's just. By the way, the author's name was Norman Duncan, and he was born in Brantford, Ontario. And it's like, well, he's maybe people won't know about him in Newfoundland for the very simple reason he's a mainlander. And finally, the night before the wedding or whatever, I met someone who I want to consider to be my friend, Ted. I will, later on, if you were for permission, use his last name. So we had a very, very, very interesting time talking about Newfoundland history, and of course, the subject of Billy Topsail come up. But Ted would call himself I don't want to put words in his mouth, but an amateur historian in the amount of detail that when we have this conversation was just, when he talked about Newfoundland, was just absolutely amazing. So in the process of talking about Billy Topsail, he hadn't heard about it. But, and I was like, oh no, another time. Someone else doesn't know. Is this a real story or was it not? One of the suggestions of someone I talked to before about Billy Topsail was to call this publishing company in St. John's. Well, they hadn't heard of Billy Topsail, so it's like, oh no, So the next day I meet Ted at the wedding, and he introduces me to someone who's much older than him, And this guy's telling me everything about Billy Topsail, about Norman Duncan, and the several books that he had written, which he says is Newfoundland lore. And I said, wow. And then it's a question of, well, how old is this person? Is it right now the people that are really old and are still living would be what would be called the greatest generation, people who were either participated in World War II or were around to remember it vividly. And this is the case. What happened? The main book was called The Adventures of Billy Topsail. As I said, I had a short story called Billy Topsail and Skipper. Well, it was a part of the culture, and then what basically happened, from one generation to another, it just like disappeared. So that's the story of Billy Topsail, and again, we call them self-reliant, an adventure, and as far as Billy was concerned, it just took too long to grow up, and he wanted to do everything, and the book has multiple adventures of Billy, who survived it all when what boys were doing at that time, to reach adulthood. There was a risk that something would happen to them, they would never make it. And so that's a little story of Billy. Now, imagine that you're coming to Newfoundland and you see it as what the media has always portrayed Newfoundland as, a poor place, and everybody from Newfoundland, got to get Newfoundland, not Newfoundland, who not had a steady job or whatever, went to Alberta, went to the oil fields, to Fort McMurray. They all moved to Toronto. Toronto is a stereotype of where Newfoundlanders would go, and so, all we hear about is poverty in the Maritimes, poverty in places like Newfoundland. So I suddenly arrive. The roads are paved beautifully. Every car that I'm seeing looks like it's less than 10 years old. No rust. And this is just going on, and it clicks in my head. What makes this place different? I always understood the offshore oil fields, the Hibernia, and there's like 3 others that were there. But was this the reason why there was a transition? And as time went on, we did a grand tour with my brother-in-law and my wife of various little beautiful places like Conception Bay, or Portugal Cove, and the island called Bell Island, and many places. And when you get into these small towns, some of them are like 23,000, the roads are paved, and the houses, I kept looking for an old decrepit house, and I had to look really hard, and the typical house looked like it was 10 or 15 years old. No, it wasn't bricked like it was in central Canada, but it's with various siding. The siding looked new, and as I said, the cars looked new, and the businesses looked new, and so it was like, where do the old houses go? That was my first conversation. But I wanted to ask someone, and so I was an approachable guy, and I every time I talked to somebody from Newfoundland, I would in these small towns, I would make this mention as, it's just the oil revenue and whatever, or what's happening, when did it all start? And then I talked to Ted, and basically he said that in most of these towns, like Conception Bay, as an example, were small fishing villages. And then suddenly along came the oil wealth. People moved from other places, whether it was St. John's or whether a lot of house building. And that's what I'm seeing as a new houses. I had to look really carefully to look at an old house. Certainly in St. John's, that's basically an old established city. But when we look at at the towns, and you look at the people who have, for example, I mean, a doctor from Ontario who was taught at Memorial University and retired to a gorgeous place called Portugal Cove. So this is an example. Newfoundland is not poor. I hope it stays. I wouldn't use the words fairly wealthy, but where everybody is comfortable. It's a beautiful place. I know what the wintertime is like. I've heard that from many people, but people care about each other. And when I hear stories of these huge snowstorms, which come in small towns, and it causes, like for example, huge snowdrifts, and so I asked them, well, what do you do? Everybody's got to go and get provisions. They said, you haven't seen what's in the fridge and what's in the freezer of the typical Newfoundlander who is just prepared for that. Anyway, spent enough on this. I just wanted to say thank you. This has been quite enjoyable, and I only wish that I get a second chance to go back to Newfoundland. Thank you. Oh, and forgot to mention that if you like this content, then just press the like button or subscribe or share it. It does wonders to the YouTube algorithm and makes my videos more popular. Thank you.